Hello, welcome to Connie Martinson Talks Books. Like a Picasso who could have a blue period and also be a cubistic painter, my guest today, Gore Vidal, has given us really, at this moment, a surfeit of riches. Because in one hand is humor, outrageous, an imagination that goes beyond the ken of most people. The book is called Live from Golgotha. It's published by Random House, and it is bizarre. It is a dream, a place you walk into and you say, is he kidding? And on the other hand, he has written Screening History. And this, too, is a book that looks at our lives and almost that question, when you look in the mirror, what movie star influenced you and whom do you really see? Well, we'll be back after a short pause with the multi-talented Gore Vidal.
Page 355.
Medications that can rob you of your sex life.
Page 141.
The secret ingredient in Italian foods that can help lower cholesterol.
Page 545.
How to silence a snorer.
This incredible book belongs in every home. The Doctor's Book of Home Remedies, from the editors of Prevention Magazine Health Books.
Over 670 pages of astonishing home remedies, all scientifically proven. Yours free for 3 full weeks.
Page 341.
Why you should never buy color toilet paper.
Now the information you need to cure over 130 common health problems is always on hand.
Act now and you'll also get this fabulous book, Meals That Heal, free.
Page 497.
Use oatmeal to end the itch of poison ivy.
Page 570.
Call now to get the Doctor's Book of Home Remedies free for 3 weeks. Keep it and we'll bill you in 3 easy installments of only $8.98.
To order, call 1-800-228-8400.
We're talking with Gore Vidal, author of Live from Golgotha, published by Random House. Welcome, Gore.
Good to be here, Connie.
And as I said to you, how do you pronounce that word?
Well, I don't really know. It is, as everybody watching knows, it is the hill outside of Jerusalem where Jesus Christ was crucified. Some people say Golgotha, some people say Golgotha. Any way you like. I think Golgotha comes more trippingly off my tongue, but...
Then I will accept that pronunciation. Live from is, of course, the implication that we all know from television. This is the most outrageous. You know, Gore, I kept reading this book and saying, years from now there's going to be an SAT question that says, the Pope is to the Ayatollah as Gore Vidal is to Salman Rushdie.
Oh, my heavens. I don't really think it'll be quite blasphemous. It's more of a comic meditation on certain aspects of religion, the mission of Jesus Christ and his relations with the Jews. But it also has a serious side, which is why is NBC slipping in the ratings, and what is General Electric going to do to up those ratings in the coming sweeps? Now, this is the serious part of the book. They have now found a way of getting back a television team to the crucifixion at Golgotha. The team is all union, by the way. There's no playing around at NBC. The technology exists thanks to Shirley MacLaine, who is also in the book. She keeps channeling in.
Cast of characters: Shirley MacLaine, Mary Baker Eddy, Marianne Williamson. I mean, they come strewing through, and a man named Chet, who is involved with Sony, bringing a Sony to Timothy, brother Timothy, Saint Timothy to be.
Yes, well, a lot happens, and the story is told by Timothy, who was the friend of St. Paul. They were pen pals.
Saint, call me Saul, Paul.
Oh, no, he called himself, when he was with the Goyim, he called himself St. Paul. Or rather, he called himself Paul. Later, he became a saint. That was his Roman name. Saul was his Jewish name. So whenever he went around to the synagogues trying to convert the Jews to Christianity, he would always start out, call me Saul. And he had invented not only tap dancing, which he does all the begats at the beginning of the Bible.
There's a little Mel Brooks as you read this book, as you come across St. Call Me Saul.
Well, I would cast Mel Brooks perhaps in it, but I think because of the profundity of the theme, which is how is NBC to save itself in the ratings, and the only way to do is to broadcast the crucifixion live from Golgotha with Timothy, now an old man, as anchor person. So that is the poignant side of it. Then we see there's also a hacker, a cyberpunk, who is destroying all the records of the New Testament. All the Gospels are being erased. St. Paul comes to Timothy. They were together sort of in the early days like Batman and Robin.
Or lovers.
Oh, yes, of course. But Timothy didn't like that sort of thing much. So Batman comes back in a vision and says, you must write the Gospel. You are our last hope. It's all being eliminated by this dreadful hacker, this cyberpunk, as they say. So Timothy sits down to try and write it. Meanwhile, because of Shirley MacLaine, who really made this whole book possible, with all of her channeling in and all of her friends are coming in, and the ancient world is just crowded with holograms. They come in as holograms. And then suddenly everybody wants input into what Timothy's going to write, because what he writes will be the only Christian story there is. So he's doing his best with that. Meanwhile, from General Electric, which owns NBC, comes their vice president in charge of creative programming, Chester W. Claypool, who brings him a TV set. This is in the year 96 AD. He's Bishop of Salonika. And the TV set is there, and he gets CNN, and he starts watching it, and he sort of catches up. And then he gets visitors who come in on the Z channel.
Which no longer exists.
No longer exists,
yes,
I know.
Yes.
But you see, time has lost its seriality.
That's the point. I mean, talk about time frame and floating in space, Gore. You have some very interesting people like Priscilla.
Ah, Priscilla, yes.
Priscilla, who keeps a diary that Edmund Wilson will come back and read.
Yes, and Henry Miller will write disagreeable letters about. Priscilla sort of writes lies about everybody she knows, and then later she writes more lies because she's changed her viewpoint. Priscilla and Aquila, her husband, were actual figures from that period, although I've tried to round them out a bit and give them
well, I mean,
resonance.
when you talk about it, there are certain Last Suppers in this book, and the ones where she is at are not exactly, what we've seen on Leonardo da Vinci's paintings.
Well, they're really more last brunches. It's the sort of thing Priscilla would like. I
like it, yeah.
She didn't have a serious Last Supper.
But she becomes the mother to the sisters.
That's right.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have all the sense of time moving back and forth. Timothy, as he writes this story, starts to relive this story. As he relives the story, people start to invade and his memory starts changing. So this is kind of an examination of how the mind works when it recalls something. And then what is history after all? It's who tells it. Who tells it knows what.
Who was there, Charlie?
Whom?
Yeah, who was there?
Was you there, Charlie?
And none of them were really there.
No, none of the people who wrote the Gospels knew anything about it. And St. Paul was actually kind of a genius, the real one. I have him as just a superb fundraiser, and he sets up churches. He has a holy Rolodex. He keeps a lot of names, and he remembers the follow-up letter.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing he teaches Timothy. Always do the follow-up letter.
Gore, where does the genesis of this whole concept? I mean, I'm reading it and I'm saying he wrote it under LSD. I'm saying it's a Fellini trip. It is the funniest, but where does this sort of ability to have without any inhibitions?
Well, it comes out of nowhere. It is charismatic in the true sense of that Greek word, which means from God. One gets inspired. When I start something like that, or Myra Breckenridge, or Duluth, I have no idea where it's going to go. And that's why it's fun to do it. If I knew where I was going, I wouldn't bother to take the trip. All I know is that Timothy is having a nightmare, and he sees St. Paul, who's been dead for 40 years, who tells him, you must write a new gospel because it's all being erased. Then the next thing, Chester W. Claypool arrives with a TV set, and he gets addicted to the Hollywood Minute on CNN, which he does think runs on a bit long, but at the same time he picks up a lot of 20th century lore. And then I'm sort of examining religion. Actually, the details of what was going on in Jerusalem at the time of just before and after the crucifixion is pretty accurate. That isn't made up at all.
But whoever thought of Jesus, not being blasphemous, folks out there, but as a low-interest payer? I mean, I've worked that one out. We don't know this for a fact. We don't know anything for a fact, but it is interesting that the historic Jesus seized the temple and drove out the money changers. Well, that sounds like, you know, those of us brought up with Christianity, we think of the temple being a little square stone building with some trays where they change money. The temple at that time hired 20,000 employees and guards. Mm-hmm. It was the banking center of the Middle East. And when he had to be a political figure with an army to seize the temple, to take over the banking system. And he immediately lowers the interest rates. Now, Rome wants high interest rates. And with that, he sealed his death by showing that he was a cheap money man. They could not have that. And so important was this bank, one of the sayings that somebody quotes in the book. When Jerusalem eats a bad oyster, Alexandria vomits. Yeah. So he has seized the banking power of the Middle East and must die for that reason, if nothing else. Then other things happen, but we mustn't give away too much of the plot. We won't say that Judas, who happens to have a weight problem, I mean, this is a part, Gore, you read this book, and suddenly you will give the most divine little tweak like, Judas, who's got the weight problem? And how could this person be in a position if he's got a weight problem, he's got shifty eyes, and he speaks with a monotonous voice? Whom could we be talking about?
Well, it remains to be seen. Readers will find out who was on the cross and who had the weight problem.
Now that's really the two great mysteries of the world that Gore Vidal has put in front of the agenda. Now, the book ends with a page in Japanese, and I said, my ignorance, I do not read Japanese.
Well, you mustn't give away that. You mustn't give away.
Oh.
It's just that finally, in the end, Japan wins. That's all we can say. But I think this is like an Agatha Christie. Anybody reading it as they read it, one of the reasons I didn't give out any advance copies and sent no review copies until the book was already in the shops, is I don't want people telling the plot. The book is filled with surprises. And if somebody sits down and gives away the plot, why, then that's takes away the pleasure.
We won't give it away, but this is a book. It doesn't matter what page you open it to, nor does it need to be read in sequence. It is funny, Gore. And we will be back after a short pause.
You've heard his hauntingly beautiful music in movies, on radio and TV. He's sold over 20 million records round the world. His name is Zamfir, master of the pan flute, that magical instrument with the unforgettable sound. Now in his magnificent all-new collection, Zamfir plays the world's most beautiful melodies. Relax, as Zamfir sweeps you away to a world of haunting, tranquil beauty. Your best-loved melodies, richly orchestrated in Zamfir's all-new 2-record treasury. remember. This magnificent collection is not sold in stores. Please stay tuned to order.
Use your credit card and save COD charges by calling toll-free 1-800-776-5800. Or, to save all additional charges, send check or money order for only $12.98 for 2 albums or 2 cassettes, or $19.98 for 2 CDs to Zamfir, FDR Station, P.O. Box 5195, New York, New York. Remember, that's Zamfir, FDR Station, P.O. Box 5195, New York, New York.
We're talking with Gore Vidal, author of Screening History, published by Harvard University Press. Gore, from the, I don't know, ridiculous to sublime, or sublime to the ridiculous life.
Back and forth, back and forth.
Boy, Aviator.
Yes, I must say, it looked like I was going to be trapped into transportation, because when I was 10 years old, I flew a plane, took it off and landed it. My father was the director of Air Commerce, and he wanted to publicize a plane that was so safe that even a 10-year-old could take it off and land it. I'd been flying a lot, and I wasn't at all nervous about that, but I wanted to be Mickey Rooney, who was a big star at that time. And my father conned me into doing this. He said, there's going to be Pathé News there with Floyd Gibbon with his patch. And you'll be a movie star, and you'll be in Pathé newsreels all over the world. Well, I was thrilled. This was my big chance. I was going to take over from Mickey Rooney. So I come on. I come on very strong. I just watched it recently, the soundtrack and everything. And I said, come on, let's go. And I'm just right out of Andy Hardy. Well, Andy Hardy hadn't been invented. Mickey was about 14, and I was 10. Then I land the plane, a very bad, bumpy landing. And I get out, and my father's waiting for me, and the newsreel crew is there. And I walk up to them, and the dialogue was to be my father saying, well, what was it like? And I was to say, just as easy as riding a bicycle. Well, we'd been in a row before that. I said, it's not as easy as riding a bicycle, flying a plane. It's a lot more complicated. I didn't want to say the line. Then suddenly there's the camera. It's on me. I am Mickey Rooney at last. And then I dry up. I just go blank. So my father gives me my cue. I don't hear it. Finally, I say, it was just as easy as riding a bicycle. And then I gave this awful leer. It looked like, you remember Peter Lorre in M?
Definitely.
I looked like a 10-year-old Peter Lorre in M who has just killed a child. And with that, my movie career was over.
But never again did you dry up, Gore Vidal.
I remained damp ever after.
Apropos, mixing both books a little bit, there was a play you wrote years later that you said they haven't kept any video of it, but where people traveled through time. Is that something that has sort of fascinated you?
Well, it's not time. Well, yes, that's interesting. It's reality. What is real? Look at your own memory. I remember nothing in my life that the other person, let us say we were together at a certain interchange of any sort, my memory is one thing and the other person's is something else.
Yeah, the Rashomon of life.
Well, Rashomon
Yeah.
was a very good metaphor for it. And so I'm constantly, that lovely line, what is it, of Keats? Do I wake or sleep? Am I dreaming or is this real? Also in something like Live from Golgotha, what I'm doing is, I'm really saying, what is history? And I'm saying, what is reality? You think something is real, or did you dream it? Did somebody tell you this? Are you taking someone else's word for something? And he dreamed it. I come to screening history, and now what I'm doing is showing the influence of movies on me during the first 17 years of my life. At the age of 17, I went in the Army in the Second War and moved into a different continuum. But I was very influenced by a series of movies from about the age of 8 or 9 to about 14 or 15. Most of them pretty bad, but they set off great psychic things. Harvard wanted me, I gave what they call the Massey Lectures, and Eudora Welty had given them And it turned out to be a very nice memoir called One Writer's Beginning, so they thought I might do that. And I said, well, I'm not my own subject. I'm not used to writing about myself. I'll give it a go, but I don't know if I can do it. Well, then I suddenly began to shift. It's the movies I was interested in, not me. So I started to write about the movies. Then I began to run them off again. The Prince and the Pauper, Roman Scandals, The Mummy, Fire Over England, that Hamilton woman. These pictures had a huge effect on me. And many of them I hadn't seen in half a century. And as I played the movies, I went back into time. Just watching a video cassette, I was half century ago, I had gone back to the age of 10 as I watched it. And it was fascinating what I remembered, what I'd forgotten. And then you suddenly see, that's where the connection starts. Then I start to talk about the politics of the period, the Depression, English propaganda getting us into the war.
Your father, who is a Roosevelt man, but your grandfather, who was the senator, who wasn't.
Yeah.
And there is a lovely picture of you with him, and I remember talking with you when we talked about Lincoln, that you were his eyes at times.
Oh, yes. He was blind from the age of 10, and I lived with him until I was 10, and I used to lead him onto the floor of the Senate, and God knows I read to him. I was forced to labor around the house because he had to be read to all the time. And my grandmother was thrilled to be relieved, as were his secretaries, so I was constantly... It was a crash course. I mean, I learned so much. I would read words I didn't know what they were, and he would help me out phonetically.
There is a very special relationship between a grandfather and a grandson.
That's what he always said. He said, never have children, have grandchildren. He did not like his children, and they didn't like him. But he and I got on beautifully.
Yeah. And your mother is a very interesting woman who, through her, it is really Schnitzler's La Ronde that brings you, as you talk about, even a president who then is assassinated, Jack Kennedy.
Well, I was saying that if I'd written about my home life, as Eudora Welty could write about her life in a small town in Mississippi, nobody would believe it. My stepfather, after marrying my mother, then marries Jackie Kennedy's mother. Then her husband gets shot. And my grandfather is blind from the age of 10, invents the state of Oklahoma. My mother is somewhat on the order of Tallulah Bankhead, to put it politely. My father starts 3 airlines. I mean, all of this stuff, it's, as somebody once said, the only novel I really wrote about my own life was Washington, D.C. It was dismissed as an MGM movie. It was all so glossy, and so I always stayed away from the subject because it looked ridiculous, our family. Also, everybody else was writing about us. So in the long run, I think I will leave the family. I will not do a memoir. I have left it to Kitty Kelly.
Gore, in some ways, you are a very chic Savonarola. You had the exposure to Mrs. Roosevelt. You have had certainly an influence in your writing. Who politically influenced you the most?
Well, my grandfather influenced my character the most, and that was a populist. The only sovereignty is that of the people at large, a dislike of the rich, of the banks. And then the only other influence was Eleanor Roosevelt, who I saw a lot of her the last 10 years of her life. And Eleanor told me about politics. She said, it's nothing but explaining things to people. He says, it's very tedious, but you've got to do it. And if you do it, they will understand what the issues are, and they will not vote against their interests, which is what the bad folk would like them to do. I thought that was my approach to politics, and it still is. But in the age of the soundbite, and Jennifer with a G or Jennifer with a J, who can explain the deficit? Who can explain the Pentagon overruns? Who can explain? The only thing to talk about in this year's election is the conversion from war to peace and how to save money and how to make bullet trains instead of Seawolf submarines. No one's mentioned a word about it. Clinton will cut back this much more the Pentagon budget because he's a good Southern boy, and Southern boys like the defense budget. And Bush will hardly cut it at all. Well, these things are not addressed. I would have thought, and were I an active politician now, and I'm still on the political circuit, you must explain these things. People are very interested in them. I mean, they just found out that the Republican family values does not work. The American people were turned off by that. They don't want Woody Allen to be dragged in as emblematic of the politics of Clinton and Gore. They want to know about the economy. I mean, this is a case of a political team treating the American people as if they were cretins. They may not know much, and they may be ill-educated, but they sure understand money, and when they're poor, and who's doing it to them.
Gore, as always, I keep always saying at the end of anything we ever do, to be continued. So I will be looking for the next publication from Gore Vidal. I know you mentioned you're writing for The Nation currently, but that's going to come out as another book.
Another book, which will be published next week, called The Decline and Fall of the American Empire. It's a paperback, small house out here in California, whose name I can't remember. But it's 6 pieces sort of explaining how we got into this mess, from the national security state of 1950 right down to, if I may say so, an all-out attack on monotheism as the basis of our discontents.
As I said, to be continued, and I want to see how you get us out of it. Gore, will you autograph my book, please?
Great pleasure.
And if you would like a copy of our publication, Good Books, please send a stamped, self-addressed envelope to Good Books, P.O. Box 69, 1640, Los Angeles, California, 90069. Look for our column in all the California Press Bureau newspapers. We'll tell you about some other books we've liked recently, and if you have never read Gore's book, Lincoln, this is a classic. It's also out in paperback. Do not miss reading it. It is the first time I really learned about Mary Lincoln and that she was the woman.
Connie, it's Hollywood.
I'm holding Hollywood. Hollywood, which is a whole other story about...
to be continued.
To be continued. But do read Lincoln. It is a brilliant book. I loved it. And Hollywood wasn't bad either, because this was about politics in Washington and how, again, the silver screen influenced everyone's life. Whom do you see when you look in the mirror? And we'll support your local library, our finest institution, and support RIF. Reading is fundamental. We'll see you next time. Gore, thank you. I thought it was going to be Lincoln.